God damn, it has been raining a lot outside. Seriously, if you're living in Pennsylvania, at least around the area where I live, it's been raining like a ton. Honestly, getting sick of it. Hey guys, C-Man235 back with another video, and this is something I've been wanting to do for a little while now. If you've ever seen Some Call Me Johnny's Then and Now series, this is going to be similar to that, only it's not scripted at all, and I'm going to be doing this in sort of a vlog fashion. But with that said, I'm going to give my updated thoughts on specific games that came out sometime like maybe a year or two ago. And I'd say 2 years would be the limit, but who knows, I might break that rule later on. With that said, I did an impressions 2 years ago on, well, I guess like maybe 1.5 years ago, on Pokemon X and Y. Specifically Pokemon Y, because that was the version that I had at the time. I got them both right here, Pokemon X and Y. There we go. With that said, both versions really aren't that different, with the exception of exclusive Pokemon. There's nothing really to say, which I was a little disappointed by, considering that Black and White had differences between versions. For example, Black City and White City were exclusive areas depending on the version you chose. At the same time, you also had different areas looking drastically different. Like, I think in Black version it was more technology focused, while in White version was more organic. There was more like wildlife, and I think that's what White City and Black City kind of set out to do. Just White City was pretty much a place where you could get old Pokemon, as well as getting Pokemon, and it was like forest based too. But in Black City, it was all technology and all that stuff, and it looked really cool. And Black City also was probably better because you could refight trainers over and over again, and that gave you more experience. But White City, you could get exclusive Pokemon, so both had their own thing going for them. With that said, my take on Pokemon X and Y when I first made the impressions was pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good first attempt for Pokemon in 3D. Back in my really old shitty impressions video where I had that really shitty 3DS as a camera. I don't even think it was using the 3DS XL. I think it was using the 3DS. Yeah, I was using that really shitty 3DS. I actually have it out in the living room. And let me show you guys. This was it. This was the original 3DS I had. I have Pokemon Pokedex 3D on right now, which is horribly outdated as fuck now. Why do I have this on? The camera I used when I recorded that really shitty video, and I had no editing whatsoever, unlike now where I edit a lot more. So, yeah, thank God for that. Thank God for this new camera. With that said, my recent take on Pokemon X and Y has become more mixed as I play it more and more. Ooh. Lightning Flash. Yeah, I know you can't see it, but the lightning just flashed. It was... Pokemon X and Y, like I said, has become more mixed as I play it more and more. It's not bad, I will say that. If you love Pokemon, then you're going to love X and Y. Alright, well, first off, let me get to the region, because that actually, I think, is, like, the one thing I barely touched upon is the region. I will say, Kalos is actually a pretty fun region to travel through. The dungeons aren't that big of a deal, like in other generations, like, for example, Generation 1. Generation 1, to me, had the worst dungeons in the series. But the dungeons were actually pretty fun. They had a few cool ideas to them, and some of them were really just, like, rehash of what we've already seen before, but there were a few of them that were okay. Like, I like the mirrored cave with a bunch of, like, mirrored rocks and everything. I forget what it was called, but that was a pretty cool cave. At the same time, what I also really liked, and why it's great for multiple playthroughs, is that there's a huge variety of Pokemon. There's like over 400 Pokemon in this, right from the get-go with the campaign. And that's counting legendaries, but, you know, there's a lot of Pokemon in this. Probably, it's the biggest regional dex. There's 3 regional dexes. You know, it's pretty impressive what they were able to do with this. With that said, though, at the same time, while there is a big variety of Pokemon, you can clearly tell they borrowed a lot of elements from Generation 1 and sometimes Generation 2. Mostly Generation 1 though. You know, the first area, the first forest area, the first dungeon is Viridian Forest. It's pretty much Viridian Forest, only not as annoying. And by not as annoying, I mean there's more variety in Pokemon. Because you got the 3 elemental monkeys, you have Pikachu's more common, and you can also find your standard bug type Pokemon there too. But there's a big variety of Pokemon in every patch of grass, and that's what I like about it. But there's a lot of borrowing from Gen 1. Like, there's also another point where you have to wake up a Snorlax with the Poke Flute, and that's ripped again straight out of Generation 1 and Generation 2. It's just you notice these things, and if you play Generation 1 like I have, and there's a little too much of that, but I'm able to forgive it, because there is enough new stuff, but there is a little too much of it at times. And so the region itself is pretty fun. I do like the region. My problem with the region, though, is that it's not as interesting as, say, regions like Unova. While it does have some interesting landmarks, like I really love the Lumiose City, despite the fact that I actually think the angle which you control the character in Lumiose City, it kind of fucks with your control a little bit. Like, you know, the position of the camera is behind you, and I think it's too close to your character. Because of that, the controls can feel a bit weird. But I do like the idea of Lumiose City. That was a really cool idea, and I want to see more of that in the next game, in the next couple of games. They didn't do it for Omega Ruby, but I didn't really expect them to. It's a remake that has to be accurate to the original. I hope they do it for Pokemon Z, though, because there's really no reason why they shouldn't. At the same time, I was also disappointed that this generation had the least amount of new Pokemon. It's not that other generations of Pokemon were outright bad. Every generation has its ups and downs with Pokemon, but I'd say Kalos is the worst with it, because Kalos only has like 70 new Pokemon. And that's really disappointing, especially when Unova had the most amount of Pokemon introduced for a generation, and I loved almost all of them. I liked the Elemental Monkeys, despite them being relatively useless. I liked them design-wise. I liked Krookodile is one of my favorite Dark types, because I used him during my first playthrough of Black and White. He was really useful. I used him again in X and Y, because he was there. I found a Sandile. I was like, oh, I love Krookodile, so I decided to take him. In fact, all the Pokemon that I really have for my teams weren't any of the Generation 6 Pokemon. Mostly because they're usually just kind of useless, with Saber for a few exceptions. You know, Aegislash I hear is pretty good. Like, really good, actually. The starters I obviously used. That's, like, an obvious one. The legendaries were cool. I like Yveltal. I like Diancie. I like, Xerneas. I hate Zygarde. I hate him. He is just butt ugly. But, you know... Oh, and I like Goodra. Goodra was awesome. I actually really like Goodra, only because of the anime. I didn't use him, but I do have a Goodra, and it kicks ass, so... Goodra's awesome. But, you know, Saber for a few exceptions. When I did my playthrough of X and Y, I don't really use many of the new Pokemon. I mostly use ones from previous generations. So you can clearly tell they're nostalgia whoring. It's clearly Pokemon trying to play it safe. I know why they did it. It's because they were just entering the 3D Pokemon phase. You know, how this is going to change all Pokemon games. They're going to get more and more 3D with time. They're entering the 3D transition. I get that. Still, you could do more with it. And I hope Z kind of does at least a little bit more than it with it. Since, you know, they have a third version, they might as well do something cool with it. Like they did with Black and White. They, instead of doing Pokemon Gray like we all thought they were going to do, we got Black 2, White 2, which was a sequel. A really good sequel. Arguably better than Black and White. In terms of everything else, how is the gameplay? How's the battle mechanics? Well, not much has really changed. I can talk about Mega Evolutions, which, you know, they're fine in the context of the game. I know I've heard a lot of mixed reactions on the Mega Evolutions. Personally, I'm fine with them. It's pretty much a way to make some Pokemon useful that weren't useful before, or just, you know, to make old Pokemon exciting again, since some Pokemon haven't really had much to do. And since you can't go past stage 2, it's nice to have like a temporary evolution. And a lot of the new designs for the Mega Evolutions really do look cool. Savor with a few of them. And I of course love that Mega Lucario is the first one you start out with, because Lucario is my favorite Pokemon. That's really like the only major change. Well, okay, then there's the Fairy type, which is a new type. It's there to balance out dragons. There's not much more to say, and it's there to supposedly make Poison types moves more useful, but let's just face it, Poison types aren't much more useful than they are, they're still pretty useless, I mean, I think Fairy types have other weaknesses that you can use as well, so. With that said, though, it is nice to have a type that balances out dragons, because I actually went back to Pokemon Soul Silver, I played that again, and dragon types are really broken. Like, a lot of the pseudo-legendaries that were dragon types are really fucking broken. Fuck you, Lance, and your 3 fucking Dragonites.
Sweet semen of baby Jesus! Get yourself a Dragonite! Lance uses 3 Dragonites because they fucking work and because bitches love Dragonites! He gets his cock sucked 3 times an hour! That's 1 for every Dragonite!
In terms of the battle mechanics, they're the same as any other Pokemon game. It's still a turn-based system. The Pokemon with the highest speed goes first. It's pretty much the same thing. You use your Pokemon in different ways to defeat your opponent's Pokemon. For example, like you use your opponent's you take advantage of your enemy's weaknesses and your Pokemon's strengths. That's been the basis of Pokemon in general. There's really not much new other than, with the new type and Mega Evolutions, which to me aren't really that drastic of a change. Graphically, the game looks gorgeous. I love the cel-shaded art style. I think it's great, and this is a look that I think really fits Pokemon. It has an anime cel-shaded look, and I think that fits really well, considering, this is Pokemon we're talking about. And music-wise, I think it's a great soundtrack. I like Generation 5 and Generation 2's soundtrack more, but Generation 6 has a pretty great soundtrack overall. It's at least on par, if not better than Generation 1. I love the battle theme. And I especially love the remixes they have in Super Smash Bros. So, yeah, great soundtrack. It also starts off much faster than other Pokemon games, like you already have the running shoes. I love that that's there. Finally, I don't see why the running shoes had to be a separate item. A few other complaints I have before I end it off as well, though, is there's not much replay value after you beat the game. Like, other than completing the Pokédex, there's, like, nothing else. There's, like, the Battle Mansion, and that's about it. And even then, that's not going to keep you coming back unless you want, like, a specific item. And other than that, that's pretty much it. Not even the Elite Four, at the same time, doesn't change its lineup. It never changes its lineup. It always stays the same when you refight it. Something I'm glad Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire fixed. I definitely appreciate that. At the same time, finding Mega Stones can be a pain because you have to find them at a specific time. Again, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire made that a lot more convenient. I will say the game is still really fun. It is actually really fun to replay, try out different. It's especially fun to create your team of 6. It's easier than ever. And one other new addition that I really like, actually, before I end this off, is Super Training. It makes EVs and IVs so much better to understand. You can look up a guide of Super Training. But once you look up a guide and know how it works, it is super easy to level up your competitive team, and that is a godsend. Now, there is one more thing I also want to touch upon, and that's the story. I know story generally doesn't matter in a Pokemon game, even though it's an RPG. Mostly because you would say it's your standard, 10-year-old goes out, or in this case it'd actually be a teenager. So, I guess 13-year-olds go out and capture and enslave dangerous animals that have the ability to level cities, and beat 8 gym leaders who are there in this game. The gym leaders really weren't that interesting. In fact, I argue the anime does a better job with their characters than in the games, which is a shame because that's usually not the case. But yeah, you capture and enslave animals to force them to fight other enslaved animals from 8 gym leaders, and then fight the best animal capturing people. You know, Pokemon's kind of morbid now that you think about it. But yeah, you know, it's your basic 10-year-old go out and on an adventure and capture Pokemon and become the very best, like no one ever was, and stop being some evil terrorist organization on the way. But my main problem with the plot has to do with the terrorist organization themselves. They are bland as hell. There are some things I like about them. I like the way they talk. They're actually pretty funny. You know, if you choose not to take them seriously, they actually talk in this really hip, cool way. Like, it's from like the 80s or something like that. Or 90s or something. I don't know. I don't know what slang they use, but it's really funny. If you actually listen to the way they talk, it's pretty funny. But at the same time, their story doesn't make any fucking sense. They apparently want to steal Pokemon for profit, I think that's what their goal was. But the leader's intentions are actually to make a perfect world, to make a world that is beautiful. And I did not, I was like, oh, one of these assholes, oh, perfect. Well, maybe he's gonna be better than some of the other assholes. And he is so obviously the villain. Like, you don't know he's the villain at first. They play it up like he's a good guy that the professor and the other people know, and he's nice to you, until the very end where he reveals himself to be the villain, the bad guy, and he is just so bland. Not only that, but his vision of a world that's beautiful doesn't make any sense. Apparently he wants to wipe out all people who don't turn to his side, aka all people who don't join Team Flare. And he's willing to wipe out all people in Pokemon just to get that wish, and use some weapon that AZ created that wiped out millions of people in the past, and it's not very well explained. Like, there's another character, AZ, who is captured by I forget the villain's name. I forget. He's that bland, people. I forget his freaking name. But he's captured by Team Flare, and he's, you know, he's full of guilt because he used the weapon, he made and created the weapon a long time ago, and it's pretty much described it as this. There was once a man who loved Pokemon, and he suddenly turned bad, and he made a weapon, and he killed a bunch of people with that weapon, and then his friend Pokemon Floetta suddenly left him. No freaking surprise there, because he destroyed a bunch of people, and he's been guilty ever since, and he somehow lives for 10,000 years, I think. Somehow, it's never explained how he lived. The only guess I can make is that, I don't know, Arceus might have done something to him. I heard theories on that, but I haven't heard anything substantial. And honestly, fan theories aren't going to do it for me. I'd rather get the real reason. Why has he been able to live for this long? Why has he been living this long? Shouldn't he have died at this point? Or it doesn't make any sense. There's such a lack of explanation. It's a shame too, because there are good ideas here. There are good ideas. The idea of this guy being guilty for killing a bunch of Pokemon and humans is really, really dark, but it could work if done right, and written well. He could be a sympathetic character, but we don't know enough about him, and I don't really feel anything for him because of that. We're supposed to feel really sad for this guy, but we don't, it doesn't make any sense. Not only that, but the whole adventure is just you going on an adventure with your 5 friends who you barely learn any of their characters, so it doesn't really matter. The only one that's really interesting is Shauna. And, you go on an adventure with them, and you go on an adventure with your Pokemon. But then all of a sudden, at the very end, genocide! It just comes out of left field, and it doesn't make any sense, and it just is silly. It's silly, and this kind of thing shouldn't be taken so poorly, It's so poorly executed. And it's really disappointing because Generation 5 brought a darker story to Pokemon. Generation 5 brought a much more mature, much darker story. It's just, it just made it pale in comparison. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Pokemon X and Y is a fun game. I was a little disappointed with a couple of things, but overall, it's a fine start for the 3D games. But ultimately, there are better Pokemon games out there. I'd say Generation 5 is better. Hell, I might piss off a few people by saying this. I think Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire is better. I liked a lot of the stuff they did to kind of fix how traveling works in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, how you can travel to different routes and flying over the region. And I also think that Heart Gold Soul Silver is better as well. And I also think that, you know, there are better Pokemon games out there. But X and Y is a good starting point for the 3D Pokemon games. It's Pokemon playing it safe, and there are a lot of problems that I have with it, but it is still a fun generation. So, with that said, I'm the Steamman235, signing out.